Welcome everyone. We have a great turnout for tonight's topic. This is a great topic that I'm really excited about local law 18, short-term rentals and Airbnb listings. One quick disclaimer that I want to throw out there. At least for me, I'm going to be using the word Airbnb and short-term rentals interchangeably, but it all falls under the same umbrella. Airbnb is just the 800-pound gorilla in the room that we all recognize. And without further ado, let's go ahead and introduce our guests. So first, I want to welcome Sherwin Belkin. Sherwin is a founding partner at Belkin Burden Goldman LLP and has represented owners in numerous proceedings and hearings before a vast range of bureaus, departments, and courts. Mr. Belkin has lectured at seminars and is frequently called upon for interviews by the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, and The Real Deal and beyond. Mr. Belkin has been recognized as a super lawyer and awarded an AV preeminent standing, which is the highest rating for both legal ability and ethical standards as determined by the bar and the judiciary. Up next, I'd like to introduce our other guest, Aaron Shmulewitz. Mr. Shmulewitz is a graduate of NYU School of Law and currently heads the co-op and condo practice at Belkin Burden Goldman LLP. Aaron's practice includes the representation of more than 250 cooperative and condominium boards in New York City and has close relationships with virtually every major cooperative and condominium management firm in the city. Mr. Shmulewitz is recognized as one of the leading experts in cooperative and condominium in the cooperative condominium field and is regularly quoted and featured in various publications and news outlets. And then I have also my colleague, Andy Leight, who's a senior vice president of operations at AKAM. And then myself, I'm just a vice president of business development at AKAM as well. So just to give everyone an agenda for tonight's presentation, we're going to give some background and some statistics about the short-term rental market in New York City, as well as Airbnb. An overview of the New York State, New York City short-term renting rules that are recently being implemented, and the effect of local law 18 on short-term renting in New York City as a whole, as well as the impact on cooperatives and condominiums specifically, and what boards and managing agents should consider. And then we're going to wrap up with best practices for handling short-term rentals, at least how we at AKAM handle them. And then we're going to try to get to some of the Q&A. There is a Q&A box at the bottom. We encourage anyone who has a burning question to chime in. One quick disclaimer, this webinar is not intended as legal advice. This is just going to be for informational purposes only. Our goal at the end of this is that everyone who attends walks away with an understanding, general understanding of the law, of local law 18, what's new, how it affects them, how it affects their building community, etc. And that's it. Yeah, let's get on to the statistics. Just so that everyone has an idea of how big of an issue this is, or how big Airbnb is in New York City. New York City is actually Airbnb's third largest market worldwide, behind London and Paris. Airbnb currently has 23,526 full apartments in New York City that are available for rent, 41,000 listings total currently as of today. Approximately 9,294 of those listings are rented for 200 plus nights a year. So these are apartments that are fully Airbnb. No one really lives in them other than Airbnb guests. These, again, 200 nights per year. That's full time. And then of those listings, Airbnb listings go on for on average $236 per night in New York City. And all this data is courtesy of InsideAirbnb.com. And again, just to give everyone who's attending some perspective on, some context as to what these stats mean, what, how big is total available rentals right now. This is actually data that I pulled from StreetEasy as of January 2023. There's currently 28,980 apartments available for rent in the total 5 boroughs. So just to give you some perspective, there's 23,000 apartments available on Airbnb, 23,000 apartments on Airbnb, 28,000 total available for rent on Street Easy, available to New York City local and dwellings available to locals. So now I'm gonna pass it on to my colleague Sherwin. If you could just give us some background as far as, I guess, give us a definition. What is a short-term rental? Explain local law 18. What's new, and yeah, take it away.
Sure. Thank you, Gil, and thanks to AKAM for putting this together and inviting Aaron and I to participate. We're talking about both state law and city local law. So in New York State, you have the multiple dwelling law. It applies to multiple dwellings. That's buildings with 3 units or more. As a general rule, one cannot rent an apartment for less than 30 days. That's a short-term rental. That's illegal. There is an exception to that. If the host is a permanent resident, that means someone who has occupied the apartment for 30 days or more, and occupies with the guests, the Airbnb folks entering into the unit, that becomes a legal short-term rental. Now we have local law 18 that has just come into effect. Local law 18 applies in New York City and puts more restrictions on short-term rental than the state law does. So it deals with the exception to the state law. Even where the host is a permanent resident and is in co-occupancy with the folks renting via Airbnb or some other platform, in order for this short-term rental to be legal, the host of the platform needs to register this unit with the City Office of Special Enforcement. All sorts of information needs to be provided, including evidence that this is a permanent residence of the host and that there will be an occupancy. So first of all, you have the registration requirement. Secondly, and this may be even more important, owners are allowed to sign up to ban these short-term rentals in their buildings. And if an owner signs up on the banning list, a host will not be able to register. The two registrations will interface. So the result of local law 18 as it impacts the state law is in New York City, it's likely, very likely, to reduce the available supply of units to Airbnb, to Verbo via this registration process.
That was a great summary. Thank you, Sherwin.
Sure.
And so, yeah, what's new is that new process of having, as of this Monday, I believe that what's new is that process of having to register your building as either, prohibiting your building from hosting Airbnbs, right? That's
correct. I mean, Monday, March 6th is when you could sign up, and my phone and email was blowing up from owners wanting to know where do they go, how do they sign up. Didn't talk to a single client that did not want to get on this list.
amazing. So yeah, some quick questions I wanted to run through for you. Why does New York City want to regulate short-term rentals and Airbnb listings in the first place?
Well, I think there's multiple factors. One is it takes rental apartments off the housing market. New York City has a dire housing shortage. Gil, the statistics you gave, particularly units being rented via Airbnb for 200 days a night, those are units that could be rented to New York City residents and their families for full-time occupancy. Those units aren't available. As we'll talk about later, I think tenants assume that owners vet their neighbors. Airbnb loses that. You can be living next to a constantly changing set of suitcases and neighbors, not someone that's really been vetted. I would also suggest that, COVID had a dramatic impact on the hotel industry in New York. Airbnb is a competitor for the whole hotel industry, and certainly the number of units that are rented via Airbnb in a hotel industry that's quite depressed right now really hurts that industry.
Absolutely. Just to get into what if someone registers as a possible host, not prohibiting it, but rather they are registering with the OSC, what does that entitle them to do, or how does that process work?
That entitles them to, they will get a registration number that entitles them, if assuming they are not on the ban the building list, it entitles them to rent for less than 30 days, but with two caveats. The person renting must be classified as a permanent resident, which essentially means they live there full time, and that person needs to be in occupancy with the persons that they're renting to.
Ah, okay. So just one room within their dwelling they could rent out, right?
I believe it's up to two guests.
Up to two guests. What legal action can property owners, tenants, or building management take against renters who violate these rules around short-term rentals?
Well, as a general rule, litigation is expensive. It's time consuming. The housing court, as a result of the pandemic, is beyond backlog. I suggest that owners, as a first instance, communicate by themselves or via counsel with the tenant, with the offending person by letter, saying what you're doing is illegal. What you're doing could cause you to incur significant fines. What you're doing could cause me to evict you. Stop immediately and confirm that you've stopped. If they don't stop, the next step may be litigation.
Understood. And does the hotel industry have a stance on these short-term rentals, or how does the hotel industry play into this new law?
I assume the hotel industry was a major lobbyist behind this new law. The hotel industry's feeling about Airbnb, Verbo, etc., must be somewhere between despise and disgust. I wouldn't assume they're big fans, so I assume the hotel industry is thrilled.
Excellent. I did just get a quick question in here that I somewhat applicable I wanted to cover. Is there any indication yet of whether services like Airbnb will comply with this local law, fight it, or simply ignore it? Do we know that yet? Has Airbnb made any sort of?
I don't know that they've said affirmatively that they will challenge it. They have made a number of statements that this is draconian, over the top, perhaps setting up a claim of some sort of municipal overreach. But I've not read anything where they've specifically said they're going to challenge.
I'd be shocked if they didn't challenge it, because the purpose of it is to cut off the supply, as Sherwin mentioned, cut off the supply of available apartments. And that is essentially putting their business model at risk. I'd be shocked if they don't seek to challenge it.
Good input. Gian, if we could go to the next slide, I'd like to get into specifically how this plays into the dynamics of co-ops and condos. I know that's a major concern for most of the participants today, and anyone who's on the board of their building. How they want to know, how does this affect us? So for Aaron, does the new law have any differing effects on co-ops and condos, or how would a co-op or condo interact with this new law, these new registrations, differently than a rental building, or would it all be the same?
No, legally speaking, it's all the same. Property owners can now, the whole goal of this law is to allow property owners to reassert control over the use of their property. And that property owners includes co-ops and condos or the boards. Instead of an owner of a building, we have the co-op board running the building or the condo board running the building. But in terms of taking advantage of this new law by getting on, for example, getting on the prohibited buildings list, co-op and condo boards are just like building owners. They can and they should take advantage of the new law as soon as possible.
Amazing. The law applies to Class A multiple dwellings, units in Class B multiple dwellings, which have been approved by the city, by New York for legal short-term occupancies are exempt from this requirement. Let me see. Oh, this just gets into, yeah, if you could just give us some info as far as the fines or the penalties. This is open to either Aaron or Sherwin. What are the violations in terms of monetary violations that
Well, for individual violators, in other words, apartment owners, the fines are they range from $100 to $5,000 or triple the revenue. That's for each violation. So theoretically, one night of illegal Airbnb usage, each night of illegal Airbnb usage is a separate violation, which could trigger a fine of, let's say, $5,000. It's a pretty expensive night. The penalties begin in July of 2023. There's a separate set of penalties for the booking services like Airbnb, and those are $1,500 per violation, $1,500 per violation. Once again, listing an apartment illegally or in violation of the new law, every time they list it is a separate violation. So the violations here, the fines here are hefty.
Yes, absolutely. That's what it sounds like.
And Gil, I just wanted to mention, as Aaron just pointed out, for the providers like Airbnb and Vrbo, it's not merely reaching fruition and actually renting illegally. It's the advertising that can really hit them in the pocket.
Yeah, absolutely. One quick question that I had for Aaron, as far as in a condo, if you have an individual unit owner who has not, they want to participate and they come to you as a management company, they say, hey, I didn't opt into this. I want to, I own my unit outright. I have a deed. I have, and I want to rent it out on Airbnb. You have no right to stop me. What would be an appropriate response to someone like that?
Well, the appropriate response is the correct response, that the condo board does have the legal right to stop them. When they bought their apartment, they signed on to a set of bylaws. The bylaws say that the condo board makes all decisions with regard to operations in the building, and the condo board has the authority under this law and many other laws to do various things and to make various decisions on the use of the building and apartments in the building. That apartment owner might want to use his apartment as a recording studio or a blacksmith shop or a warehouse, but he can't do that either because the law prevents that and the condo board will stop it.
Excellent. Now, one quick question. This was a hypothetical scenario that we cooked up before the webinar. Can a building owner convert all of their units? If someone owns a building, can they convert the entire building into Airbnb rentals? How would that apply? Would that, how this new law affect that?
Well, then each apartment would have to comply with the new law. Each apartment would have to be registered individually. And by the way, an owner can only register one apartment per owner. So the answer is no, you cannot.
Oh, okay. That's a good caveat. Okay, I didn't know that. All right, Gianna, I think let's go on to some of the best practices. And Andy, I'm going to start with you on this one. What are some reasons that our boards would want to prevent short-term rentals from taking place at their building?
Sure, Gil. I mean, various reasons. I mean, obviously, I don't, condos and co-ops specifically have stability of ownership. You wouldn't want a transient occupancy in and out. Transient occupants will have a tendency to care less about the building and their surroundings, how they treat it. But I mean, additionally, everyone's vetted in a condo and a co-op to some extent, right? So, you're going to be putting people in and out regularly. You have safety issues, security issues, privacy issues. I mean, for all of those and probably 6 others I'm not recalling at the moment, it's just not what you would want in your building, basically. Most of our buildings, condos, co-ops specifically, have this more community sense, a stability, a vetting process in place when those residents come in. And that just is completely absent on an Airbnb short-term rental circumstance.
Absolutely. Yeah, we're missing those controls.
Yeah, and I would just mention those same concerns apply in rental buildings. Tenants renting apartments assume that their neighbor is a full-time resident, has been vetted by the landlord, gone through an application process, had finances and background examined, and that they're not going to have an ever-changing cast of characters around them. So it's really, I don't see a major distinction.
Absolutely. And this is just going back to Aaron for a second. Someone just wants a clarification that can all apartments be banned by a co-op board? Meaning if a board elects, we're putting our building on a prohibited list, that's final, right? That applies
Correct.
to everyone in the building equally.
Correct. The owner of the building, in this case, the co-op board, can put the building, the entire building, on the PBL, the prohibited buildings list. And that means that that building is unavailable. Nobody in that building can legally offer an apartment for a short-term rental. And much more importantly, Airbnb and booking services like it cannot offer apartments listed in that building for short-term rental, cutting off the supply.
Excellent. Andy, so yeah, I just want to continue on the thread of best practices and what we do to, as far as training building staff.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's all the things that you have listed on this PowerPoint slide, Gil. It's, training building staff to look out for things that are telltale signs. If someone keeps coming to a similar unit with, luggage every 7 days, I mean, clearly there's an issue. A lot of buildings are implementing visitor logs. Some are even implementing photographs on the building link system, basically. And then obviously our managers are, to the extent that they can, I mean, they can't make it a full-time job, monitoring various sites, Airbnb, Verbo, et cetera, looking for, even if an address is not listed. I mean, obviously, if you see an address, looking for photos, distinguishing characteristics, trying to determine if any of those buildings or our buildings are being advertised on these sites. And we have caught people, certainly. So it's really, a lot of it's just common sense. Again, I think most door staff concierges know who's coming into their building in a more stabilized living environment. And if they see this continued inflow of people coming in, same unit or even different units with, 4 big pieces of luggage, I mean, there's certainly a potential there. And we don't ask them to take any action, but we certainly ask them to notify management. And then, appropriate inquiries can be made on the flip side.
Amazing. Now,
I have some additional thoughts that we have for years suggested that our clients include a rider in their leases, residential leases, that explains what illegal short-term renting is, barring it from the building, making the tenant liable to indemnify the owner for any fines or expenses that are imposed. The reason being that the Department of Buildings or other enforcement agencies have always imposed the fines on the building owner, not the host. The DOB has always taken the position that jurisdiction is over the property owner. The property owner may have nothing to do with the renting, may even have tried to stop it. I'm aware of owners who have been fined up to $50,000 for situations they had nothing to do with. We've recently added to our rider to reference local law 18 to advise tenants we're on the banned building list. if you just signed up on this list, I would probably send some message around to the entire building, whether it's via email, building link, a memo advising that you are now on this list, letting tenants know what they can and cannot do, letting them understand the penalties for violation. I think that could nip a lot of violation in the bud.
Excellent. This is a great question someone asked here, and I'm gonna try to get into some of the Q&A. Most boards are going to be in favor of registering on the PBL. This person in particular wants to know, are there any downsides to registering?
In my opinion, no.
Yeah.
Period.
So I would just say if a board has previously allowed co-op or condo unit owners to have, if they have a 2-bedroom apartment, to have a guest stay in their 1 bedroom, in one of the bedrooms for less than 30 days, if they've permitted that practice and they now bar that, couldn't there be some uproar in the building?
Well, there's always an uproar in these buildings to begin with. That's how we make our living, Sherwin.
Couldn't it be a louder uproar?
It could be, but there's a difference between allowing a guest to stay with a shareholder in the apartment on the one hand, and allowing the shareholder to list the apartment on Airbnb looking for, transient occupants. That's in the way I look at it, it's the very antithesis of the permitted guest. Could there be an uproar? Yes, there could be an uproar. Boards change policies all the time, and boards often become more or less restrictive with regard to occupancy issues.
I agree with you, Aaron, that there's no downside. I was just pointing out that there could be scenarios where unit owners are unhappy with this new restriction.
Absolutely. So a lot of the questions I'm getting are regarding enforcement. So I'll try to reach a few of these. Practically speaking, can a board summarily evict individuals who are determined to be occupying a short-term renter? I don't know if evict is the right word there.
Well, yeah. So my answer was going to be on paper, yes. In the real world, it's a lot harder.
Yeah. Can you elaborate on that?
Well, as Sherwin indicated, the courts are very backlogged to begin with. The courts, even before they were backlogged, were somewhat pro-tenant. And the combination of the two would make it harder and longer and more expensive for a board to actually evict somebody for violating these restrictions.
And I would argue, you're not going to take a step like trying to lock somebody out or change a lock. That could be deemed illegal. So that's nothing you can do. So unless you're going to get into a physical altercation with somebody, I think it's probably best to deal with it administratively and as needed, as opposed to in the moment live trying to prevent that person from accessing the unit. Aaron Sherwin, I'm certainly happy to hear any thoughts you have on that regard.
No, in my experience, if someone comes to a building trying to gain entry to an apartment and they have been given some license to enter by the unit owner or the prime tenant, if you call the cops to say, don't let this person in, the police will
not
99% of the time say this person has consent, let them in. If you think you can bring legal proceedings, God bless you.
That's sort of what I was trying to get at, I think. Yes.
Someone asked a very general question. I guess, Aaron, if you want to handle this one, what about sponsor units? What about sponsor units?
So as I indicated before, the law restricts only one apartment, assuming the building is not on the PBL. That's the first question. Did the board put the building on the PBL against the sponsor's wishes? Number one. Number two, assuming the building is not on the PBL, the sponsor can do at most one apartment. You're limited to one apartment. And the sponsor can only do that one apartment if it complies with the very onerous and, to me, intentionally difficult hurdles that the law throws up to registering. But even if the sponsor does everything right, the sponsor can only do it for one apartment.
Understood.
Just
Someone,
one addition, Gil, one additional best practice. There are sites, I recall one like Sublet Alert, where you can enter your property and you get triggered if there is entry into your property or an attempt to sublet it. There are various other databases that, in addition to just scouring Airbnb and Vrbo, that you can sign on to try to preemptively stop rentals.
excellent plug right there. Sublet Alert. Someone asked.
I don't have a piece of it.
No, it's it's the first time I've heard of it, but I'm familiar with similar websites. And yeah, it's a great resource. What department? Someone's asking, what department will arbitrate these penalties? The ECB, DOB, someone else? I know the OSE is the one who's enforcing it, but if either of you know a little more about that.
I would assume they'll be heard at the ECB.
Mhm.
I would assume that.
I don't know the answer.
Yeah. Will Airbnb, okay, so this is a really just a more of a Airbnb specific question. Will Airbnb start withholding money from the hosts that are doing this illegally? This is, I don't know if anyone on this call would be privy to that. Who is deemed a property owner if a condo unit is illegally rented short term, the deeded unit owner, or the condominium itself? So who would the city go after in that case? I think we've covered, if you're on that list, if you're on the PBL, it's the condo.
I think, as Sherwin indicated before, the city is going to impose the fine on the condo.
Right.
And if the condo wants to turn around and try to recoup it or bill it back to the apartment owner, that's between the condo and the apartment owner.
Understood.
Sherwin?
Yeah. That's.
I think that's correct. Although, as I read local law 18, isn't the condo owner ultimately liable?
You could make that argument.
I mean, despite the fact that the actual responsible party may be the deeded owner, invariably it's likely that the building is going to get written the violation and be responsible.
Which is why it's suggested using a rider and other documents that make, whether it's unit owners, renters, etc., liable for any fines or penalties that are imposed, and to indemnify the building.
So, just to my understanding, I want to make sure I'm on the same page with what both of you have said. This PBL, this prohibited buildings list, this is going to be provided to Airbnb and as a prohibitive measure, like preventative measure, so that they're aware, hey, if these buildings come up, if anyone tries, being a host on any of these buildings on this list, you're not even, it's a non-starter. You're not even going to allow that listing to populate on your website, right?
But it goes beyond that. The PBL is to be publicly accessible. So anybody can go on the website, theoretically. Anybody can go on the website and check. But yeah, I assume that the OSE is going to inform Airbnb, all these acronyms, of the PBL. And yeah, they would then act at their own risk if they take a listing. Sure.
Okay.
And again, if you're on the PBL, those units can't, even if a host wanted to comply, they can't then register their unit.
The rules. Okay, so here someone's asking an elaborate question here. The rules for the PBL state that the applicant must certify that leases for units in the building must prohibit short-term rentals. What if the leases do not provide this and it requires a supermajority to amend the form of the lease? Not
So
sure.
I think what that question is referring to is that to register, forget the PBL, if the building is not on the PBL, and if an apartment owner or tenant wants to register his apartment to be eligible for Airbnb listing, he has to certify various things, one of which is that his lease, and neither his lease nor any other document prohibits him from renting out his apartment short term. I don't see how any apartment owner, apartment tenant can certify that because it wouldn't be truthful.
Yeah, that's what it seems like. All right, this is an interesting question because it seems like it's sort of in a gray area. What about a midterm rental such as corporate housing? Can a condo owner rent it for such a service? These are rentals, but these are, not short term. These are above 30 days.
Then it's outside the law. Then
Yeah,
the law doesn't address it.
Yeah,
That
I
would
mean,
be,
it would not be prohibited by the short-term rental law. There are other laws that could potentially impact that. So if you have a building with a tax abatement, there are periods of time that apartments must be rented for. If the units are rent stabilized, there are questions about doing that. So it doesn't run afoul of the short-term rental law if the period is more than 30 days, but there are other laws that could be impacted.
mhm. I'm just going through. We've got a lot of good questions here. I'm just trying to,
But while you're looking, let me just throw one thing out there.
please.
The real property law gives every rental tenant the right to take a roommate. Any sole tenant on a lease can take a roommate. If there are multiple co-tenants on a lease, they can take a roommate, but the number of roommates plus tenants in occupancy cannot exceed the number of tenants on the lease. My expectation is there are going to be folks that are making all sorts of claims going forward that this person is my roommate, this person is a member of my immediate family, this person is my short-term guest, to try to end run around these limitations. And as was pointed out before, using building staff to really vet who is coming to the building is going to become paramount.
Yeah, absolutely. These are all really practical measures that a building could take. So we have two more clarification questions that I wanted to get to. Just to confirm, once a property owner adds themselves to the prohibited list, a tenant is prohibited from short-term rental even if they are present in the apartment?
Yes.
Correct.
That's good. And then someone else is asking, is there a deadline to register by? I know that the registration didn't start until this past Monday, but is there a deadline? Is there a cap, or it's open?
A board, from my perspective, a board could decide a week from now or a month from now, or there's a new election next May and the new board decides next May to do it. No, there's no time period, no time limit.
Understood. Anything else while I look through the rest of the Q&A? Anything else that either one of you wanted to cover as far as what we discussed tonight? Any local law 18? Anything else regarding short-term rentals?
I think we've done a pretty magnificent job.
I think so too. I think we left no stone unturned. Really, there's not much else to say at this point. All right. I just want to thank all the speakers. This was a real treat. We're really spoiled with the two guest speakers that we had tonight. I know this was the topic that the timing couldn't have been better. This was something I was really looking forward to covering. It's applicable regardless of whether you're you're a condo board, you're a co-op board, or you're a landlord, a property owner, someone who, you know, just wants to keep their building residents, you know, safe and you know, and know who's coming in and out of your building. So yeah, I just wanted to thank everyone who attended, thank everyone who presented tonight. And if you have any other questions, here's everyone's contact info. Please feel free to reach out to any of us, and we'll be happy to get to your questions. All right.
Thank you to AKAM for arranging this.
Absolutely.
Thanks so much.
Of course.